Hi, I am Lieutenant Bradley Brown. I'm currently a nautical science instructor at the United States Coast Guard Academy. I graduated from the Academy in 2015. I went to my first cutter, Coast Guard cutter Stratton, national security cutter out of Alameda, California for 2 years until 2017. In 2017, I transferred up the coast to Crescent City, California, way up on the Oregon border, and I was the commanding officer of Coast Guard cutter Dorado for another 2 years before coming to teach in 2019. So this is my sea story, a little bit of a multi-part evolution of my time as a cadet and then into my officer career, and my first experiences with drug cases and how that really ballooned into a great team and crew mentality. So my first class summer, I was assigned to Coast Guard cutter Boutwell, a 378-foot high endurance cutter out of San Diego, California. We got underway, I joined the crew, we got underway and we immediately went down to the Eastern Pacific region to do counter-narcotics operations. While there as a cadet, I was breaking in on the bridge, learning what Coast Guard life out at sea is like, and I was getting my quartermaster of the watch qualification. At night, I don't know what time it was, must have been like 2 in the morning, we had a drug case. We found a go-fast vessel. We launched the helicopter on board, the armed helicopter interdiction squadron, Hitron squadron, and they shot out the engines, and our boarding team swooped in and made the bust. And it was really cool because the first time I'd really seen this operation take place. Being up on the bridge, I don't think I was actually on watch, but something exciting's going on. I want to see what's happening, so I went up on the bridge and just augmented the watch, and it was a really cool experience to see all these moving pieces taking place, and my sole responsibility, I remember it right now, my sole responsibility in that was just keeping the log, keeping that paper log of what was going on, all these different authorities and evolutions. Did we have permission for warning shots? Did we have permission for disabling fire? Where was the boarding team? What time did they get positive control? Oh my God, we found the drugs on board. All right, let's get the crew member off, and then just waiting for that process to play out. So over the course of, I don't know, it must have been 2.5 hours, all I was doing was up on the bridge, keeping that rough paper log of what was happening, who was happening, who was doing what as it was happening, and the disposition of this case. So it really set the tone. I was on board for 3 weeks. That was the most exciting thing that happened. It really set a huge tone in my eyes as far as a cadet, what to expect when getting out to the fleet. So I returned to school, did my senior first class year. Everything was great. I got my assignment to Coast Guard cutter Stratton, and I joined Stratton in the middle of a counter-drug patrol that must have been July 2015 after graduation. So I joined the crew in July in Mexico in a port call, and then we were underway for about another month before returning home to San Diego for an offload and then Alameda for home port. In that month time frame, it was pretty busy. It was a busy summer for the Coast Guard as far as drug interdiction goes. Stratton was busy as get out and was making some big things happen. So it was about a week after I got on board. I want to say I reported on board, it was like July 5th, July 6th, 2015. And pretty much within a week, we had a self-propelled semi-submersible SPSS case. We had some information, we acted on that information, and we interdicted this self-propelled semi-submersible, and it was a daytime bust. Multiple small boats went out, stopped this vessel, and the big thing about it was an intact recovery. So SPSSs are inherently dangerous, inherently unstable, and they're pretty much always scuttled by the crew when they're going to be interdicted. So this was significant because we had an intact recovery. The ship was not scuttled, we safely secured it, we got positive control, and we got the bust. What was on top of that even more significant was this was Stratton's second intact SPSS recovery during this patrol over that summer. So I think this was the first cutter to have 2 intact recoveries in the same patrol. and it was, I think, 7,200 kilograms of cocaine on board, which is not a small amount by any means. So we got the recovery. We had a public affairs specialist on board. She got some great imagery, and even now, when I see some Coast Guard headlines, I see Coast Guard news stories about operations or Stratton, I can always pick out that bust in particular because there's some very iconic imagery. And I remember being on board when we were circling this SPSS for, it was a daytime interdiction. We were on scene for it must have been almost 24, 30 hours because we had so much work to do after the fact. We had to get the crew off when we got positive control, secured the boat from scuttling, then we had to take all the drugs off. And because SPSSs are so inherently dangerous, we only had a certain amount of time. We had time periods on board to get the drugs off. So it took a long time to go through the boat with our limitations to get as many drugs off as possible. And because it was taking so long, we had the crew and we were just doing small boat runs back and forth, and they could only take off, I don't know, maybe 100 kilograms of drugs, maybe 200 kilograms of drugs at any given time. So it was just small boat evolution after small boat evolution. We had to hand carry all the drugs from the small boat, bringing them into the notch of the National Security Cutter, offloading them, and then hand carrying them up a set of stairs across the flight deck, all the way up the starboard side of the cutter to the bow where we finally secured them. When it was all said and done, it was an all-hands evolution. Pretty much everyone was getting in on the action, from the lowest non-rates to captain and XO, handling these drugs in just big bales. They must have been this tall, that wide, and maybe 8 to 10 inches thick, and it was just drugs, all the drugs. So when we finally got all the drugs off that we were allowed to, that we could safely get off, we had a stack on the bow, another iconic piece of imagery that's floated out in the internet somewhere. And it's a stack of drugs pretty much across the whole width of the bow of the National Security Cutter. It must have been 30 feet wide, 6 feet tall, of just drugs. And then we had some miscellaneous bricks there as well, and we took a crew picture up on the bow with it. And it was just incredible, the amount on board. And going from a cadet, seeing the crew work together in the high stakes evolution, and then being an officer and involved on the bridge again with this high stakes evolution, especially with this big drug bust. It was really cool to see the crew come together, the camaraderie we all felt. Stratton was just laden down with drugs to the point where when we got to San Diego for our offload, we offloaded 33,000 pounds of cocaine. And it was worth $1.3 billion. At the time, it was the largest Coast Guard offload. We had a huge press conference. There were 54 pallets of drugs spaced out on the flight deck, and we took a big crew photo. So it was just incredible to see all of this effort over the entire patrol period, and my small little piece at the very end, being a part of this crew coming together to get the job done, was really, really spectacular. We had the Secretary of Homeland Security, we had Admiral Paul Zunkoff, again, some more iconic imagery of our crew lined up both on the flight deck and in the press conference. I can always pick out and say, oh, I was there for that. It was really cool to look back and see Coast Guard operations in this great big piece that we do day in and day out. It doesn't get a lot of recognition sometimes, but it's cool to see and remember to be a part of this great big operation and how it all came together. And that's my sea story from a time as a cadet to an officer, and the big impact that we have and how many operations that we take part in.